The Jets added some big names this offseason who are guaranteed to get a lot of snaps, but there are also some lesser known players who are going to battle it out for playing time. Who are these players? We'll discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, May 20th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, of course, we're a couple of months away from the start of training camp. The Jets are also in the middle of their off-season program right now, but all eyes are really ahead looking forward to the 2024 season. And once we reach training camp, well, a staple of training camp are always position battles. And today we're going to talk about position battles the Jets will have as they enter training camp in 2024 once we get into the summer. And for the Jets this year, I actually don't think there are a ton of true position battles for starting spots because really, if you look through this roster, there aren't a lot of spots that are obvious holes. In fact, I'd even argue that most of the spots on this roster are filled by proven players, which is certainly a refreshing change of pace for this franchise, a franchise which over the last 14 years or so has put out consistently some of the worst rosters in the league. Normally we'd be talking a lot about position battles between guys who aren't very good. This year we don't have a ton of position battles because Jets have a lot of talent on the team, but there are still a few spots where I think players are going to battle it out for playing time. And the first spot I think is going to be a rookie versus a veteran, and it's for the last starting receiver spot, the wide receiver 3 spot. It's going to be between a player who is very popular, who the Jets just traded up for, in Malachi Corley, versus a player who's very unpopular, a guy who already 1 year in is going down as a massive free agent bust in Allen Lazard. And I'm here to say that this is not necessarily a zero-sum game. Now, look, I think the question here is not whether Corley will win the number 3 job or whether Lazard will win the number 3 job. The question is more which player gets which percentage of the snaps, because I think both of these players are going to have a role on offense. And I know a lot of Jets fans won't want to hear that, but here's the thing with Allen Lazard. I feel like I've been in the same place over the last, year plus with Allen Lazard, where I felt like he was fine as number 3 or 4 receiver. I said this, this is essentially what I've been saying for the last year. It's what I said a year ago. He's fine if he's like your 3rd or 4th option. He's not great. I don't think he adds a whole lot to the table that you couldn't get from any other NFL caliber receiver. I don't think that there are really any plus attributes to the extent he has them. And maybe it's his size, but he doesn't really, impose his will. He doesn't really use his size to win contested catches a whole lot. He doesn't really physically dominate smaller corners. But he's perfectly, he's fine if he's your 3rd or 4th option. I don't think he's as bad as he looked this past year. I mean, look, in his Green Bay years, he was never the drop machine he was with the Jets. I think he got a contract that was way too big for the Jets a year ago. I think he was woefully miscast as the number 2 receiver. I said this all a year ago. And what's interesting is I feel like I've stayed in the same place, whereas Jets fans have really changed their views on Lazard over the last year, because a year ago right now, a lot of people said, well, this guy's a good number 2 receiver. That contract is perfectly fine. And now people are saying, he doesn't even belong in the NFL. And to be fair, I mean, he did look like a guy who did not belong in the NFL last year. But I think that the addition of Mike Williams moves Lazard into an area where he's better suited. I can't blame Zach Wilson that Lazard couldn't catch a pass last year. I mean, it's not really Zach Wilson's fault. But when Lazard gets to the hole in the zone, Rodgers will be able to find him better. I think there's, Rodgers is a receiver. Rodgers is a creature of habit when it comes to his quarterback play and what he expects out of receivers. And that's one of the reasons Lazard is here. And I'm not saying it's a good reason to give him that contract, but there were reasons the Jets brought in Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb last offseason. Now, again, the reasons probably should not have dictated those two getting contracts, especially Cobb. And these reasons were not good reasons to give Lazard the contract they gave him. But Rodgers is like a creature of habit, and he wants his receivers to know. He wants to know exactly where his receivers are going to be. So he likes receivers he builds chemistry with. And Rodgers has been notorious for, being not the easiest quarterback for young receivers to work with. There are always going to be exceptions. There are always a couple of guys he's comfortable with. Like his last year in Green Bay, he had nothing but young receivers, so he kind of had to lean on them more than he typically does. But Rodgers is, a football genius. When he's in the pocket, he can break down a defense unlike anybody else, and he expects his receivers to be on the same page with him. So, I think it's used as a criticism of Rodgers frequently that he's tough to work with. He's a tough guy to work with when you have young receivers. I don't know it's so much a criticism. It's just he operates on a very high level, and he wants receivers who also operate on a very high level, or if not at least on a very high level, at least know what he's thinking, because I guess, nobody would say Lazard operates on a super high level. And that's where Corley comes in. And I think the question is, how quickly can Corley develop his route running? Because if you want to be honest, I mean, this was a guy who was converted from running back, caught a lot of screens in college, did not really run a big route tree. I mean, how many times did Corley run an option route in college, which is a staple route from the slot? And Corley played mostly in the slot in college. He did not have a lot of experience on the outside. An option route's a staple. It's a route slot receivers run all the time, where essentially they can either go left or right, and it pretty much depends on the leverage of the defender. If the defender is playing outside, the receiver breaks inside. If the slot corner is playing with inside leverage, the guy breaks outside. And you have to run your route at a certain depth, and you have to get to a certain spot at a certain time. A lot of an NFL offense is based on precision passing. It's based on very precise timing, and Corley, could learn this stuff quickly. And if he does, then I think he'll pick up more snaps. Now, I think Corley's going to play a role in this offense. Question is, how big of a role will he play? This is probably not the type of receiver you typically want to drop right into a Rodgers offense for the reasons I just mentioned. Is Rodgers wants to develop good chemistry with a receiver, and that can take many years. Even Davante Adams, who eventually developed into the best receiver in the NFL with Rodgers, it took time for them to build a trust. Adams was not an elite receiver until a couple of years into the league. So the question is, how much will the Jets lean on Rodgers' trust in Lazard, and how much will Corley impress them? How much will Corley get into the action? And, this is not a true position battle in the standpoint that, the guy that wins gets all the snaps and the guy that loses, never plays, because no matter what happens, I think the Jets are going to design touches for Corley. I think that, part of the reason they got him is they were super impressed with his film in college. And if you watch his film in college, I mean, almost all of his big plays are him just making plays with a run after the catch. Him catching the ball and him doing something, something special, him running guys over, a very physical type of runner after the catch. A lot of receivers after the catch, they're more speed guys. They have the breakaway speed. I'm not sure that's Corley's game. I think Corley's kind of a guy who plays the receiver position like a running back, which makes sense because he was a running back and he was converted to receiver. And, I don't know if this is a great example of a guy. I don't know that they're necessarily the same player, but there's a guy that comes to mind with a similar biography who ended up having a lot of success in the NFL. It was Golden Tate, who played many years with the Seattle Seahawks, had cups of coffee with some other teams, with the Giants, with the Eagles. He was a guy who played running back. He started off as a running back, then moved to receiver, came to the NFL. He was a receiver in college like Corley, but kind of played the receiver position like a running back. I don't know that there are other ways they're not stylistically the same, but when I think about their biographies, when I think about some of the aspects of their games, that's a parallel that comes to mind. But Rodgers also wants receivers who are going to be receivers, and I think that the question is, how much trust will Rodgers develop with Corley, and how quickly will he do it? I think another thing that comes into play here is Corley did not have a lot of experience on the outside. So I think we can guess that, if the Jets are going to teach Corley how to run routes, they're going to start with this from the spot on the field where he at least has lined up before, which is the slot position. And that means, he's probably not going to play outside all that much. And I think the Jets are also going to try and find moments where they can get Garrett Wilson into the slot and get Mike Williams into the slot. And Lazard is probably more likely to line up on the outside than Corley is. So that's where Lazard's snaps will come from. The question is, how many snaps can Corley take from Lazard? And I think most Jets fans would hope the answer is a lot. But I think both of them are going to play a role in the offense. It's more a question of ratio. What percentage does Lazard get? What percentage does Corley get? Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the backfield. We just talked about wide receiver who plays like a running back in Malachi Corley. Well, the Jets drafted 2 running backs this year, and they both could be in line to get some playing time. We'll talk about that position battle continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. If you're a Rangers fan, very exciting. The NHL's Eastern Conference Finals begin. The Rangers against the defending Eastern Conference champion Florida Panthers. That series begins Wednesday. If you're a Knicks fan, I'm sorry. I mean, what can you do when your team suffers that many injuries? It's not the team's fault. It's just the Knicks were too banged up. They're going home. Knicks will not win the NBA championship, but you can win on FanDuel because, again, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're talking about position battles the Jets will have once training camp opens this summer. We talked about one of the skill positions, that's the wide receiver spot. Now let's talk about running back. And that running back, we're not talking about who the number one guy is. That's going to be Breece Hall. And I would expect Breece Hall, as long as he's healthy, to get the bulk of the carries. I think the Jets really want to utilize Breece's game this year. It's going to be interesting to see what Breece can do now that he's got what on paper looks like an offensive line that could block, and for once an offense that actually has a passing threat. Hopefully, as long as everybody stays healthy. The question is, who's the guy that comes in when Breece is tired? And I don't think this is good. There's some teams where the running back carries are doled out equally among multiple players. I don't think that's going to be the case with the Jets. I think, if anything, the Jets showed last year that, some showed the pitfalls that can come with that when they tried to kind of, at least in the early part of the season, make Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook equal partners in a backfield timeshare. I think, not so much the Jets have learned their lesson from that, but Cook is gone and Breece is the guy. The question is who comes in when Breece needs a rest, because Breece can't play the whole game. And there's also the idea, you don't want to run a running back into the ground. I mean, you only have so many carries you can take in the season for a running back. Somebody has to come in and give him some relief. And Jets drafted a pair of running backs in the third day of this year's NFL draft. Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin and Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. And they're both bigger type backs. And also Izzy Abanikanda is going to be in the mix here, second-year running back out of Pittsburgh, who has a different element. He's more of a speed type back, whereas Allen and Davis are bigger type backs, more power to their games. And, I think there are a couple of questions that will come to mind here. I think the first question, like nobody really thinks of this, but the thing that keeps rookie running backs off the field more than anything else is an inability to pass protect. And you can mock that idea, and I understand that in some sense, the ability to pass protect isn't necessarily what you're looking for in a running back. Running back is a running position, so you're really looking what can they do when they get the ball in their hands? Can they break tackles? Can they read the blocks? Do they have good vision? Are they decisive in their cuts? Can they find that extra gear? Those are things that usually matter when we're talking long-term success in the NFL. But with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, I think Aaron Rodgers, to the extent a quarterback can change the equation, Aaron Rodgers definitely is going to want a running back in there who can pass protect. If you can't pass protect, you're probably not going to play, because Rodgers is not going to want to take hits because his running back can't block. And the Jets are going to certainly focus on making sure Rodgers stays upright this season. You don't want a 40-year-old quarterback to take a ton of hits. So I think one of the first things that could determine who gets that second role is, who can pass protect, because, Breece showed he can catch the ball last year. But I'm not sure, despite the numbers he put up, is Breece's game always going to be that he's going to be a dynamic receiver? I think Breece's game is more just like he can catch the ball when it's thrown to him. And once he's got the ball in his hands, he's a dynamic playmaker. But, I'm not sure. It's possible that, if one of these backs really flashes in the receiving game, they could become like the third down back. The Jets kind of went away from Breece in third down situations a year ago, even though he posted very big reception stats out of the backfield. They went with a couple different guys in that third down back role, and they kind of went away from Breece. And beyond that, I think I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, Rodgers, the focus with Rodgers is going to be keeping him upright, because as long as Rodgers is healthy, the Jets should have a shot to win games this year. And you don't want him to take big hits because his running back can't block. And it's one of the most difficult things, one of the most difficult parts of the transition to the NFL for running backs, because college schemes tend to be much simpler. You don't have as many complex reads. I mean, there are situations where in the NFL, you may have to look at two different guys. You have to account for two guys, and you have to see which of the two blitzes, and then you have to adjust your plan accordingly and hit whatever the two guys blitzes. They're more complex reads when we're talking about pass protection. But also, when we look at training camp, when we look at the preseason, the big question is going to be the obvious: who's making plays? Who can grind out tough yards? Who can make the big runs? And I think it's difficult to speculate on that. We'll see what these guys do once they hit the field. I mean, I think that of the three, what I saw last year, including Abanaconda's brief stint in the lineup, I mean, Davis is a guy who I think could win that job. I think Davis has a shot at taking that second back role. I think with Allen, the question is, can he get back to that freshman form he showed at Wisconsin? Because of his 3 years, far and away, the best year he had was a freshman in 2021. He was 17 years old. He should have been in high school, and he dominated the Big Ten. He averaged almost 7 yards per carry in the Big Ten, and almost 7 yards per carry against a loaded box. The last 2 years have been good, but not as good. And there are plenty of theories as to why. The question is, can Allen find that role? Because the guy who looked like as a freshman, if he gets back to playing at that level, he could end up being a quality NFL back. And Abanaconda, I've been surprised by how many people are surprised that Izzy Abanaconda's roster spot now appears to be in jeopardy. And I look at the situation, I say, you know what? He was a 5th-round pick last year. He didn't really have much of a role as a rookie. I don't understand why people were under the impression that he was guaranteed this big role on this team. Look, I think Izzy Abanaconda is going to have every opportunity in training camp in the preseason to carve out a role on this team, whether out of the backfield or perhaps carving out a role in some capacity on special teams. But I never felt like Izzy Abanaconda is the type of guy whose roster spot should be guaranteed. I mean, I think that it's healthy to have competition, especially when you're talking about a late round pick. You're talking about a guy who's not established. He's had a year to get himself established, and the drafting of 2 running backs doesn't necessarily guarantee Izzy Abanaconda is gone. It just means he's got to produce. And I don't think he should have had the second running back role gift wrapped to him, because I don't think he showed enough last year to have locked down that role. He brings a different element than Allen and Davis. He's a guy who, at least on paper, in theory, has speed. And this is an offense that doesn't really have many players with breakaway speed. Breece Hall is one of them. Outside of that, I mean, you have guys who could be big play guys. Mike Williams could be a downfield threat, but he's not like a home run type of guy. He's not a guy who, he catches the ball in the flat, he's going to take it 80 yards for a touchdown. He may be able to catch a contested ball 20 yards down the field, but it's not really a guy you think about if you need an 80-yard touchdown. Garrett Wilson's got a lot of very positive attributes. In fact, I'd argue the Jets don't focus enough on getting him the ball in space. But again, I don't think of Garrett as a home run. I think of Breece as a home run threat. I don't think Allen's going to be a home run threat. I don't think Davis is going to be a home run threat. If there's another home run threat on this offense behind Breece, it could very well be Abanaconda, and that could be his calling card. That could be the thing that is a difference maker if he shows he's got enough ability. And of course, it's possible to just keep 4 running backs because, the last few spots on the roster certainly seem to be dedicated to special teamers. And it feels like the Jets care less about what position you play and just more that you contribute on special teams. Speaking of special teams, that could be another spot where we have some competitions as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. We'll talk about a few of the other areas where the Jets project to have camp battles. Again, that's continuing this Monday edition of the show. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. The schedule just came out last week, so maybe you want to head out to San Francisco for the opener. Maybe you want to go to Tennessee week 2. Maybe you want to be there Thursday night, week 3, for the Jets home opener in New England against New England. Maybe you want to head to London to see the Jets take on the Vikings. Maybe you want a late season game against the division rival. Well, Gametime is the place to go. I love Gametime. I've used it myself for all sorts of tickets. It's so easy to use. I've gotten so many last minute tickets from them. Just pull out the app and you find amazing deals. You're a Rangers fan, you want to go to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Panthers, maybe even fly down to Miami to see one of those games, Gametime is the place to get last-minute tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. We're talking about Jets position battles heading into 2024. We've talked about a couple of spots on the offense. I think special teams is a spot where you could see a number of position battles. Now, naturally, the last few spots on your roster are determined by who performs on special teams. But this year, you have a couple wild cards in the mix. One of them, the biggest one, is the changes to the kickoff rules. And everybody's got a theory. Whenever something happens, whenever a team makes any sort of move now, it feels like there's some theory it has something to do with the new kickoff rules. We'll see how it works out. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how this is going to pan out, but I think that one thing that's likely is that you're going to see kickoff returns take on a bigger role in the NFL this season than they have in recent years. It's kind of weird how the NFL's done a 180 because for the last, 15 years or so, it's felt like the NFL has done everything in its power to minimize the kickoff. In fact, it felt like for a time, the kickoff was just going to go out of business. In fact, there were even some minor leagues that had just gotten rid of the kickoff. And, if you wanted to try an onside kick, they give you a 4th down and long. You essentially get the ball with one play to try and produce a first down on a 4th and long type of play. But the NFL now kind of doing a 180 of bringing back kickoffs. And when we talk about Malachi Corley, I think going back to what we talked about in the first segment, one of the things we discussed is, his route running, we don't really know how refined it's going to be. And that's the type of thing that could limit his productivity as a rookie. Well, that's not really a knock on Corley. The reality of the situation is that third-round picks usually don't produce a whole lot for their teams as rookies. And as much as people like to make it out that the third-round pick's going to have a key role, and I think that feeling is especially pronounced in a year where you don't have a second-round pick like the Jets did this year, because you don't want to head into the draft thinking you're only going to get one contributor. But it's just not realistic to expect a third round pick to produce a whole lot. If that happens for you, I think you've actually done very well. I think you're kind of lucky. You're kind of fortunate because most third round picks don't produce that much. But one area where you would expect Corley to produce is when he's got the ball in his hands. Can he make a play? Can he make guys miss? Can he break tackles? And the challenge on offense is that Jets have some pretty good skill players who are going to need to get their share of touches. When you talk about Garrett Wilson, he's going to get a lot of targets. Mike Williams is going to get a lot of targets. Breece Hall is going to get a lot of handoffs, and he'll see his share of targets in the passing game. And even then, you have guys like Tyler Conklin and Allen Lazard, and even maybe a little Jeremy Ruckert, who are going to get their share of receptions. There aren't many receptions left to go for Malachi Corley, and that's one of the reasons I've been kind of banging the table for the idea of play him at running back a little bit. Give him some carries. Give him some of those running back 2 carries we were just discussing. If you think Corley is that dynamic with the ball in his hands, maybe you focus a little less on Braylon Allen, Austin Davis, and Izzy Abanikanda, and he gives a few of those carries to Malachi Corley. But another area where you can put Corley in a position to make plays is as a returner. And I think especially as a kickoff returner. Now, he doesn't have a lot of experience as a kickoff returner from college, but that's not necessarily a big deal. I mean, there have been plenty of really good return guys who didn't have a ton of kickoff return experience in college. I mean, it's not that hard to teach. I mean, on some level, you get the ball in your hands, you can either make a play or you can't. I do think the Jets will probably give Corley a shot as a punt returner. Now, that's tougher because you have guys bearing down on you. A kickoff returner, you're typically going to be able to make a clean catch because the coverage guys aren't going to be on you as you're catching the ball. Punt returners is a little different. Punt returners, you could have a guy right in front of you as you're trying to make the catch, which first of all is distracting, but second of all, you have to make kind of 2 decisions as a punt returner. First of all, you have to figure out where to catch the ball, but second of all, you need to figure out whether you're going to try and attempt to return or to make a fair catch, and that's determined based on the guys in front of you. That could be more difficult to learn, but either way, I think the Corley's going to get a shot at either. Get to try and supplant Xavier Gipson. I think the odds are very high he's going to supplant Xavier Gipson's role on the offense as a special teamer. And Xavier Gipson may find himself back on the practice squad if Corley shows himself to be an adept return guy. Then I think on the defensive side of the ball, there are a couple spots where I could see, if not position battles, at least questions about playing time allocation. It's kind of similar to what I talked about with the third receiver. I think, defensive tackle. Quinton Williams is going to be your number 1 guy. How many snaps does Javon Kinlaw get? How many snaps does Lecky Fatu get? And I think they'd probably lean towards Kinlaw more just because of the contract they got. I mean, the contract they gave Kinlaw suggests that they think there's real untapped talent, that Kinlaw could be a quality running mate with Quinnen Williams. The question, though, is what can Fatu do? Can Fatu perhaps supplant Kinlaw? And again, it's more about the ratio of snaps. And I think on some level, Fatu is going to kind of play the Al Woods role of a year ago, where he's going to be the guy when you want to stop the run. And Kinlaw may take on the Jefferson role, the Quinton Jefferson role, as being more of the pass rushing type of guy. So it could be a bit of a platoon. But if Kinlaw shows that he can play the run, or if Fatu shows that he can get after the passer a little bit more, they could end up earning a bigger slice of the snaps. And then you also have the safety position. I've seen some suggestions that maybe, the Jets give Ashton Davis a shot to play safety. I'm not convinced on that one. I think he's going to have an opportunity if he shows he's improved. But, Ashton Davis showed that he can play the role the Jets gave him last year, which is typically a minimal snap guy, a guy who plays a lot close to the line of scrimmage, a guy who's maybe as much of a linebacker as maybe even more of a linebacker than he is a safety. I mean, that's kind of the role I think the Jets had Ashton Davis in a year ago, even though he was technically listed as a safety. He was another guy kind of like Sherwood, who might be listed as a safety, even though I guess the Jets don't list Sherwood as a safety, but a guy who's really a safety skill set playing linebacker. I think that's kind of how the Jets view Ashton Davis, but it's conceivable, if he shows that he's grown, maybe he can give Tony Adams or Chuck Clark a run for their money for the starting safety role. Of course, we can't rule out the Jets signing somebody. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.